The movie trailer is probably the most important piece of marketing material that a movie has, right up there with good word of mouth. A movie needs to sell itself in just a couple of minutes, capturing the essence of the film, generating excitement, and getting people to buy tickets. And often, it's a decent measure of the movie. This video is not about those movies though. No, here I want to take a look at the movies that promised one thing in the trailer and then delivered another with the full film. These were audiences confused, disappointed, or, in some cases, pleasantly surprised. 2003's Kangaroo Jack had a weird production. It started life as an R-rated mob comedy similar to 1988's Midnight Run. It was supposed to have plenty of sex, violence, and profanity, and had a scene with a kangaroo. But that one scene ended up proving so popular with test audiences, it resulted in a total overhaul of the movie, so much so that the final product had a PG rating, not even PG-13. The advertising for the movie made a very specific promise: a talking, sunglasses-wearing kangaroo cracking jokes like a Looney Tune on holiday down under. Trailers pumped hip-hop beats and quick-cut gags, presenting a family-friendly, fantastical buddy comedy where the marsupial was a motor-mouthed co-star. Posters doubled down with the kangaroo front and center winking at you. The brand positioning was unmistakable. Come for the quippy animal antics. The actual movie is a PG crime caper about two Brooklyn dudes sent to Australia to deliver mob cash who accidentally lose the money to a kangaroo wearing a red jacket. The talking kangaroo exists mainly in a hallucination and a dream sequence, not as a plot-driving character. Most of the movie is about two guys in a fish-out-of-water misadventure with cartoonish antics and slapstick with a light romantic subplot. Tonally, it goes between kid humor and adult-aimed jokes, landing in a mushy middle. In essence, the animal is a MacGuffin, not a wily friend. You can detect parts of the old premise, which makes for an oddly discordant film. The protagonists were written as overgrown adolescents, which partly explains the marketing's kid tilt, but the plot machinery is low-stakes crime comedy. It's easy to imagine a version that commits to a full-on animal hijinks movie. This one commits to a safer, cheaper premise, though there was more sexual innuendo and violence than a parent might have liked. The result feels like two movies loosely stitched together, though I am going to say that it's worth noting that almost any movie with a kangaroo is worth a one-time watch. We get so few of them, after all. Alas, Jackie Legs doesn't have much screen time in the movie. Of course, I'm not sure that even if he did get more screen time, that it would have saved it. Audiences and critics hated it, with Nathan Rabin at the AV Club writing, quote, "Kangaroo Jack's premise, trailer, and commercials promise little more than the spectacle of two enthusiastic actors being kicked over and over again by a sassy computer-animated kangaroo, and, sadly, the film fails to deliver even that," end quote. The movie made just under $91 million on a $60 million budget. False advertising, in this case, did not work out. 2007's Bridge to Terabithia was an adaptation of Katherine Patterson's beloved 1977 children's novel about the friendship between two children who create an imaginary world, Terabithia, in the woods near their homes. The story was intended as a thoughtful exploration of childhood friendship, imagination, and the harsh realities of loss and grief. Director Gabor Chuspo approached the material as a serious coming-of-age drama that would honestly address difficult themes while respecting the intelligence and emotional capacity of young audiences. I'm sure that when parents saw the trailer, they thought that this would be a whimsical fantasy adventure. Trailer certainly pointed to that, and it had a sort of Chronicles of Narnia kind of vibe. There were giants, griffins, and other fantastic beasts. The CGI looked solid, and the marketing certainly implied a sort of lighthearted journey through a fantasy kingdom. It seemed like it would be a nice, light night at the theater for the whole family. The film itself is not nearly as lighthearted as the trailers implied, though. The movie is, at heart, a grounded coming-of-age story that uses imagination as a coping language. The kids invent Terabithia to survive the never-ending friction of life. Their make-believe operates like a pressure valve that keeps real pain bearable. A turn late in the movie then reorients the entire story around grief. The magic is alive, but now it's a vessel for mourning and making meaning out of loss. This is a movie that honors the complex way that kids process tragedy. The promotion caught plenty of flack. The filmmakers were as surprised by it as anyone else, as filmmakers typically don't control how trailers are cut or how marketing is done. Of it, screenwriter David Patterson, son of the author, said, quote, "Everyone who reads the book and sees the trailer says, 'What is this? This is nothing like the book. What are you doing, Dave?' And I say, you know, what you're seeing is 15 seconds of a 90-minute film. Give me a little leeway and respect. Go see it and then tell me what you think," end quote. In this case, the trailer did its job. Made on a tiny $17 million budget, the movie made a gargantuan $137 million at the box office. A little misdirection in trailers is fine so long as you deliver a great film, which Patterson and the director certainly did. The movie was met with critical acclaim, with Jeanette Katsulas at the New York Times writing, quote, "Consistently smart and delicate as a spiderweb, Bridge to Terabithia is the kind of children's movie rarely seen nowadays. And at a time when many public schools are being forced to cut music and art from the curriculum, the story's insistence on the healing power of a nurtured imagination is both welcome and essential." Unquote. Was the advertising a bit misdirectional? Yes. But in this case, the trick paid off. Bridge to Terabithia is still a beloved book and movie. Gareth Edwards' Godzilla reboot was designed as a serious, grounded take on the King of Monsters, focusing on the human drama surrounding the monsters as much as the monsters themselves. It starred Bryan Cranston, Aaron Taylor Johnson, and Elizabeth Olsen, and was conceived as a more realistic and scientifically grounded approach to the Godzilla mythos. Edwards drew inspiration from Steven Spielberg's approach to Jaws, keeping the monster hidden for much of the runtime to build tension and anticipation. As the 2010s were some of my formative years, I very vividly remember the marketing for the movie. It heavily featured Bryan Cranston's character, which made sense. Breaking Bad had ended less than a year prior, and Cranston was at the top of his game, perhaps one of the most loved actors in Hollywood. Trailers suggested that he would be the film's protagonist, showing him investigating conspiracy theories about cover-ups and monster attacks. The promotional materials also promised extensive Godzilla action and monster battles, with imagery suggesting the titular character would have significant screen time and that audiences would see plenty of kaiju destruction. Slight spoilers, but Cranston does not make it that far into the movie. Rather, it quickly switches to Aaron Taylor Johnson. Now, Aaron Taylor Johnson is a fine enough actor, but he's no Bryan Cranston. When Cranston exits, so does pretty much all the charisma that the movie might have had. Instead of going to see Cranston and Godzilla, Godzilla is all we really had left. Alas, Godzilla himself had limited screen time. Part of it might be budgetary, and maybe Gareth Edwards hewed too close in taking inspiration from Jaws and Alien, which also limited their monster screen time. But they are, in the end, pretty small creatures. Godzilla is sort of hard to miss. In fact, Godzilla appears on screen for a handful of minutes across the film's 2-hour runtime. It does work to an extent. He's often obscured by smoke, dust, and darkness, making him feel more like a mystical presence, something off in the distance, which can inspire a sense of foreboding. The film focused primarily on military response and human drama, with the monster battle serving more as background events. It was a solid movie, with Rotten Tomatoes consensus reading, quote, "with just enough human drama to anchor the sweeping spectacle of giant monsters smashing everything in sight. Gareth Edwards' Godzilla satisfyingly restores the franchise's fire-breathing glory," end quote. It kickstarted the MonsterVerse, which has proven to be successful. Was it what it promised? Not exactly. But was it good despite that? Yeah, more or less. Joe Carnahan's The Grey is one of my favorite movies of the 2010s. It's a survival thriller about a group of oil workers whose plane crashes in the Alaskan wilderness, leaving them stranded and hunted by a pack of wolves. Liam Neeson stars as a man whose wife passed away, leaving him in a terrible mental space considering the unthinkable. He needs to find the will to survive and help lead the others to safety. The movie was intended as a survival story, yes, but also as a meditation on mortality and the will to live. The marketing was a bit diametrically opposed to that. Trailers basically set it up as Liam Neeson versus wolves, and I heard a few call it Taken with Wolves. Marketing emphasized the action elements, hinting that Neeson would use his particular set of skills against the wolves and the elements. They showed him preparing for battle, strapping glass bottles to his knuckles, and setting up a fight between Neeson and the leader of the pack, with Neeson seeming Wolverine-esque. It was straightforward man versus nature. The actual film was much more philosophical, spending an extraordinary amount of time on character development, discussions about faith and mortality, and the psychological toll of extreme circumstances as opposed to action sequences. There was tension throughout the film, and it didn't short shrift the characters. All of that was wrapped in some gorgeous shots of the wild. The pacing matches the emotional pogrom of the characters. They trudge through snow, calamity befalls them, and there are long pockets of silence where you're left with the elements. Set pieces are staged for terror and smallness, not epic scale. Even the glass knuckle sequence has an emotional tint to it. It's a meditation on life disguised as a thriller. Roger Ebert, in a 3.5 out of 4-star review, was moved by it, writing, quote, "I was also stunned with despair. It so happened that there were 2 movies scheduled that day in the Lake Street screening room. After The Grey was over, I watched the second film for 30 minutes and then got up and walked out of the theater. It was the first time I've ever walked out of a film because of the previous film. The way that I was feeling in my gut, it just wouldn't have been fair to the next film," end quote. For many, as well as myself, it was one of, if not the best film of 2012. It did well at the box office and with critics, and in the end, as Siobhan Snow wrote it, there was something for everyone. Quote, "On the downside, there's a lot of dull, pretentious philosophizing about the heartlessness of nature and God. On the upside, you get to see a man punch a wolf in the face," end quote. Jennifer's Body was writer Diablo Cody's follow-up to her Oscar-winning screenplay for Juno, conceived as a subversive horror comedy. The film starred Megan Fox as a high school student who becomes possessed by a demon and begins killing her male classmates. Amanda Seyfried plays her best friend who must stop her. Cody intended it as a feminist critique of how horror films typically treat female characters, while also exploring themes of female friendship, jealousy, and the commodification of young women's bodies. The marketing campaign, however, pitched it as a hot girl turns demon, focusing almost entirely on Megan Fox's sex appeal. This was during the height of her career with Transformers, so to an extent, it made sense why they would want her front and center. Trailers emphasized Fox's provocative scenes and the film's surface-level horror elements, suggesting that audiences were in for a simple, supernatural thriller with plenty of eye candy. The promotional materials largely ignored the film's satirical elements and feminist themes, instead presenting it as a male-gaze fantasy horror film. Cody had issues with how the movie was marketed from the get-go, saying, quote, "They said, we want to market this movie to boys who like Megan Fox. That's who's going to go see it." And I was like, no, this movie is for girls too. That audience they did not attempt to reach, end quote. They also made the movie ostensibly about high schoolers rated R. What audiences wound up discovering was a sharp feminist horror comedy that was more interested in critiquing male objectification of women than exploiting it. Jennifer's victims aren't the focus in the movie. It's more about the relationship between Fox and Seyfried's characters, and despite being a horror comedy, it ends on a pretty tragic note. The movie's tone was deliberately ironic and subversive, requiring viewers to engage with its themes rather than simply enjoy its surface pleasures. The movie got mixed reviews. Cody's sharp dialogue and the themes of the movie were praised, though the movie itself left much to be desired. The issue with horror comedies is that they end up needing to straddle two wildly different genres, and for the most part fall short at satisfying either. It was neither funny or scary enough. It roughly doubled its budget at the box office, but it wouldn't be fully appreciated until years later. Argylle was, for me, one of the most disappointing films of 2024. It was conceived as a big-budget spy action comedy with some metafictional storytelling. Bryce Dallas Howard played a reclusive spy novelist who discovers that her stories are coming true. Directed by Matthew Vaughn, the film was designed as an ensemble piece featuring an all-star cast including Henry Cavill, Sam Rockwell, Bryan Cranston, Samuel L. Jackson, and, of course, Bryce Dallas Howard. The marketing for the movie promised a witty spy thriller that delivered action and humor in the vein of Vaughn's eminently successful Kingsman films, all of which I've enjoyed. Trailers emphasized the ensemble cast, the action sequences, and it had an intriguing premise. What I got when I saw the damn thing was a convoluted, long, plotting film that was bogged down in multiple plot twists, an unearned 2-hour and 19-minute long runtime, tonal inconsistencies that undermine the action and comedy elements, and more than enough boredom. The premise, rather than being clever, became an excuse for absurdity. The runtime was unnecessarily padded, and action sequences failed to maintain the energy and the wit that the marketing promised. Cavill, pitched as the lead, was anything but. It was a box office catastrophe, making $96 million on a $200 million budget. Most audiences liked it more than critics, but I'm with the latter on this one. Every hint of promise the movie had was given short shrift, which is a shame as Matthew Vaughn is a talented filmmaker. It was supposed to launch a new franchise, but it remains to be seen if that'll happen. The end credit scene certainly sets that up, and Vaughn is working on a prequel. Should it happen, I hope it's more coherent than Argylle. It just goes to show that excellent ingredients must be cooked properly in order to deliver something worthwhile. Rogue One, a Star Wars story, was conceived as the first standalone film in the Star Wars universe, telling the story of the Rebel Alliance's mission to steal the Death Star plans immediately before the events of A New Hope. Directed by Gareth Edwards, the film was intended as a war movie set in the Star Wars universe, focusing on the sacrifices made by the ordinary people in the fight against the Empire. The story centered on Jyn Erso, played by Felicity Jones, and her journey from reluctant participant to committed rebel. The trailers for Rogue One promised a gritty, ground-level view of the Rebel Alliance's struggles against the Empire. Marketing emphasized the film's war movie aesthetic, showcasing spectacular battle sequences and suggesting a more mature, darker tone than the typical Star Wars fare. This is an interesting case because tonally, the marketing is pretty in line with the movie itself. Instead, the differences ended up being behind the scenes. As it turned out, there were extensive reshoots that changed the fate of characters, plot points, and entire sequences. Reports conflict, but Tony Gilroy was brought in at the end to redo parts of the movie. In Edwards' words, quote, "Tony came in and he did a lot of great work for sure, no doubt about it, but we all worked together until the last minute of that movie," end quote. But according to Gilroy, who later made Andor, quote, "They were in such a swamp, in so much terrible, terrible trouble, that all you could do was improve their position," end quote. Ben Mendelsohn, who played Orson Krennic, seemed to affirm how different Edwards and Gilroy's movies were, saying there were, quote, "enormous differences within, I would have said 20 or 30 of the scenes," end quote. From the trailer and from what we got, it really seems like there's not much difference. The final film maintained the promised war movie tone and the more mature tone. Gilroy, by all accounts, wanted to focus the film more on sacrifice, something that we certainly got in the movie, though you can also pick that up in the trailers. This was a case of all's well that ends well, and a case where the trailer only lied in a very specific, invisible to the public manner. When the trailer was cut, one movie was made, but when it was released, it was, emphatically, a different movie. We just never saw it. Rogue One won considerable acclaim from critics and audiences, and it cleared more than $1 billion at the box office. The film's legacy is largely positive, and it's a case of a reshoot handled exceptionally well. The inclusion of Sinners is mostly an event. 2021's The Green Knight was David Lowery's ambitious adaptation of the 14th century Arthurian poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. It starred Dev Patel as a young knight embarking on a mystical quest to face the titular Green Knight. Lowery had crafted the film as a slow-burn meditation on honor, mortality, and heroism, and created a dreamlike philosophical interpretation of the source material. The marketing campaign, however, positioned it as something else. You get the sense that they wanted to portray it as an epic fantasy adventure. The emphasis was on the action, the visuals, and the mystical elements of the legend. The stunning cinematography and excellent production design shone through in the trailer, though it seemed more like a straightforward narrative. But those that were expecting a conventional fantasy epic were in for a surprise. The film itself is quite deliberately paced. It's a symbolic art film that emphasizes atmosphere and character over anything else. There were long stretches with minimal dialogue, interesting imagery, and ambiguity that demanded attention and interpretation from the audience. That's the case down to the ending, which leaves it up to the viewer to decide what Gawain's ultimate fate is. This is an example of Lowery's deliberate filmmaking. He did shoot a more definitive ending, but went with the one that we got because, again, it would involve the audience more. It's certainly a divisive film. While critics loved it, audiences were split pretty much down the middle. The audience consensus on Rotten Tomatoes captures that side well. Quote, "For better and for worse, the beautifully filmed Green Knight is a different take on a classic story that takes its time in the telling and leaves a lot open to interpretation," end quote. That's understandable. Some films can be frustrating, more so if you expect one thing and get another. Partially impacted by the release dates moving around thanks to COVID, partially by the word of mouth, the movie made just $20 million on its $15 million budget. It was an artistic achievement poorly served by the marketing, which pitched it as one thing, even though it was quite another. The audience it attracted was not the right fit, though once you get past the slow pace, it is an excellent film. The relationship between marketing and expectations is complex. In some cases, the marketing is a cynical attempt to mislead for box office gain. In others, it's a misdirection that leads to a movie that's better than anyone could have imagined. There's a power and responsibility that comes with marketing, though. You want to be honest, yes, but not too honest. You want to leave some things to the imagination, but you might also want to make it completely antithetical to what will be shown. It's a difficult line to walk, sure, but it must be done.